My story is about what happens when people only see what they expect to see and how important it is to know your own truth, regardless of appearances. It's a lesson that took me a long time to master. If you've ever felt like you're trying to reconnect with who you truly are, or find your footing again after life has pulled you in different directions, I want to share something that might help. There's a wonderful book called Coming Back to Myself, 60 Liberating Truths to Find Yourself Again. It's a powerful guide for that very journey. Now, let me tell you about a time I had to put that lesson to the test. My son thought I lived on my small pension. He never knew that I still owned 3 rental homes that quietly paid for everything he and Lori took for granted. I never corrected him, not once. Maybe that sounds strange to you, but after you've lived as long as I have, you learn that money can twist the way people see you. It can make them treat you like a project instead of a person. So I kept that part of my life tucked away, like an old photograph I didn't want anyone to find. My name is Catherine Warren. I'm 70 years old, and I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. I've been a widow for nearly 15 years now. My husband, Harold, passed suddenly one Sunday morning, right before church. He was 59. We had been married for 38 years, and for the first few months after his passing, I didn't know how to breathe without him. Harold left me a few things, but not a fortune. We both worked hard our whole lives. He ran a small plumbing business, and I worked the front office. We saved what we could, invested carefully, and bought 3 little rental homes before the market boomed. By the time I retired, those homes were my cushion. They paid for everything, the property taxes, the church donations, my groceries, and even the college savings I quietly built for my grandkids. But no one knew. Not even my son, Richard. He's 42 now, married to Lori, and they have 2 kids, Caleb, who's 8, and Lydia, who just turned 6. Richard is a good man, steady and practical, but like most children, he sees his mother through an old lens. In his mind, I'm still the woman who clipped coupons and baked bread on Sundays because store-bought bread was too expensive. Truth is, I still bake my own bread because I enjoy it. I like simple things. Every morning I walk my small dog, Daisy, around the neighborhood. I stop at the same coffee shop, chat with Nina, my neighbor, about her garden, and then spend a few hours volunteering at the church food pantry. That little pantry has been my second home since Harold passed. Helping others keeps me grounded. You'd be surprised how many families in Scottsdale live paycheck to paycheck behind big, fancy doors. One afternoon, while sorting canned beans, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. He rarely calls during the day, so I knew something was up. "Hey, Mom," he said, sounding cheerful but rushed. "Lori's parents are inviting us all to dinner next weekend in Dallas. They've been asking to meet you for a while. Thought we'd all fly down together." I smiled, wiping my hands on my apron. "That sounds nice. What's the occasion?" He hesitated. "Nothing big. Just they've been wanting to get to know the family better." There was a small pause. I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. "Mom," he added quietly, "just so you know, Lori's folks are a little formal. They're old-school Dallas types. Her dad, Gerald, owns a chain of real estate offices. Her mom's on a few charity boards. Just be yourself, okay?" I chuckled softly. "I don't know how to be anyone else, Richard." He laughed politely, but didn't respond. I could almost hear his nerves through the phone. I knew that tone. It was the same one he used before introducing a new girlfriend in college, back when he worried I'd say something too plain or too honest. After we hung up, I sat for a while at my kitchen table. The afternoon sun poured through the blinds, and Daisy rested her head on my slipper. I thought about what Richard had said. Formal, old-school Dallas types. I'd met plenty of people like that in my life, people who measured others by what they wore or where they lived. It never bothered me much. But something in Lori's voice lately had changed. She'd stopped mentioning me to her coworkers, and when she sent me photos of the kids, they were always from their country club or some expensive vacation. I started to wonder if she felt embarrassed by my modest lifestyle. That night, I called Pastor Ray, an old friend from church who always gives it to me straight. "Ray," I said, "have you ever been somewhere you knew you wouldn't fit in?" He laughed. Every time I walk into a deacon meeting, we both laughed, but then I told him about the invitation. He said, "Catherine, some folks put on their best manners when they think someone's watching. Others drop them the moment they think no one's worth impressing. Go to that dinner. You'll find out which kind of people they are." His words settled deep in me. I thanked him, hung up, and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. I sat out on the porch, listening to the night birds, and decided right then that I'd go exactly as I was. No fancy outfit, no talk about property, no pretense. If Lori's parents wanted to meet the poor and naive grandmother, then that's who they'd meet. I wanted to see how they'd treat me when they thought I had nothing to offer. The next morning, I checked my closet. I pulled out my favorite sky blue cardigan, the one with a missing button near the cuff. It was soft and comfortable, and Harold used to say the color brought out my eyes. I smiled and laid it on the bed next to my simple navy skirt and my old leather purse, the same one I'd carried for years. I booked my own flight to Dallas, told Richard I'd meet them there, and spent the next few days going about my usual routine, feeding Daisy, watering my succulents, and volunteering at the pantry. But in quiet moments, my thoughts kept circling back to the dinner ahead. I wasn't nervous about meeting Lori's parents. I was curious to see if kindness still existed in rooms filled with fine china and polite smiles. Curious to see if my son's wife really understood the value of respect. By the time Friday came, I was ready. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving for the airport. I saw the lines around my eyes, the streaks of silver in my hair, and thought, let them see all of it. I'd earned every bit of it honestly. As I locked my door and headed to the car, a small smile formed. They would never guess the truth. Not about me, not about what I really owned. And maybe that was the best part, because sometimes the only way to see who people truly are is to let them believe you're someone else. When my plane landed in Dallas, the air felt heavier than back home in Arizona, humid, with the kind of warmth that stuck to your clothes. I gathered my small carry-on and headed toward the exit. Richard and Lori were already waiting by the baggage claim, both dressed as if they'd come straight from a photo in a travel magazine. "Mom, you made it," Richard said, giving me a quick hug. He looked tired but happy. Lori smiled, her lipstick perfect, her hair neat in a way that looked like she'd just stepped out of a salon. "Catherine, it's so good to see you," she said politely. Her tone was warm, but there was a stiffness there, a kind of carefulness I'd never noticed before. I could tell she'd been rehearsing this greeting. They helped me with my bag, and we walked toward the parking lot. Their rental car was a shiny black SUV, spotless inside and out. Lori fussed over my seatbelt and adjusted the air vents before getting in herself. As we drove, she started talking about her parents. "They're really looking forward to meeting you," she said. "They like nice dinners and structure. My mom plans everything down to the minute. She's even arranged where everyone sits." I smiled lightly. "Well, that should make things simple." Then she hesitated before answering. "They're particular. That's all. They come from a different world." A different world. That phrase stuck in my head. We drove through the heart of Dallas and into Highland Park, where the streets curved around big oak trees and manicured lawns. I'd seen plenty of nice homes before, but these were something else. Gated driveways, fountains, even one house with stone lions at the entrance. It was the kind of place where folks hired people to trim the hedges twice a week. Lori's parents' house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It wasn't loud or flashy, just enormous and perfect. White columns, black shutters, the kind of place you see in glossy magazines. As we pulled up, Lori took a breath. They're very traditional. Don't let my mom's questions bother you. Okay? She can be blunt. I smiled. Lori, I'm 70. I stopped getting offended about small things 20 years ago. She laughed nervously. Good. I just want everything to go smoothly. I knew what she meant. She didn't want her parents judging her husband's mother. Or worse, judging her for marrying into a family that didn't match their wealth. Inside, I felt a small ache in my chest. I'd always liked Lori. She was smart and kind, but sometimes I saw how hard she tried to fit into circles that didn't always welcome her. It made me wonder what that kind of pressure did to a person. That evening, I unpacked my bag at the guest room in their house. Lori had offered to let me stay there instead of a hotel. The room was spotless, with fresh flowers on the dresser. There was a small handwritten note from Lori that said, "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." I sat on the edge of the bed, reading it twice. The words were kind, but something about them felt like an apology. Later that night, Richard knocked on my door. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm fine," I said, "just getting my bearings." He leaned against the doorframe. "Listen, Mom, Lori's folks can be a little much. They don't mean harm, they just grew up with certain ideas." "About what?" I asked. "About money, about status, I guess." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Just don't take it personally." I nodded. "Richard, I stopped taking things personally when you were 10 and told me your teacher's mom made better cookies than mine." He laughed softly, looking relieved. "Okay, fair point." After he left, I stood by the window for a long time. I could see the backyard lit up by soft garden lights, the pool glimmering like glass. Everything looked perfect, and yet I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling that perfection came at a cost. The next morning, I woke early and made coffee before anyone else was up. Old habit. I sat out on the patio, the sky still a shade of gray, and called Pastor Ray back home. He answered with his usual cheer. "Well, Catherine, how's Texas treating you?" I chuckled. "It's big, that's for sure." He laughed. "Everything's bigger in Texas, they say." "I'm meeting Lori's parents tonight," I said. "They live in one of those neighborhoods where the mailboxes are nicer than my kitchen." "Sounds like a fine place to find out what people are really made of," he said. "You think?" He hummed. "Sometimes folks show their hearts over dinner. The trick is to keep yours steady enough to notice." I smiled, knowing exactly what he meant. "Then steady it'll be." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up feeling calmer. That afternoon, Lori insisted on taking me shopping for a few dinner essentials. She drove me to a fancy boutique where the shirts didn't have price tags. I politely told her I didn't need anything new. "Mom," she said, lowering her voice, "it's just one dinner. My parents can be a little old-fashioned about appearances." "Lori," I said gently, "I've lived 70 years in my own skin. I'm not about to change it for one evening." She opened her mouth, then sighed and smiled weakly. "You really are stubborn. Only when it matters." That night, as I laid out my clothes for dinner, the same blue cardigan, navy skirt, and my comfortable shoes, I thought about my late husband. Harold always said, "You don't have to shine brighter than everyone else, just keep your light steady." That's exactly what I planned to do. I wasn't trying to make anyone uncomfortable, but I wasn't going to pretend either. Pretending takes too much energy. When you reach my age, you start caring less about being liked and more about being true. Still, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little nervous. Not about their wealth or manners, but about what I might learn about the people my son and grandchildren now called family. So I prayed quietly before bed. I asked for patience, for grace, and for the courage to stay calm if the night didn't go as planned. Then I turned off the light and whispered to myself, whatever happens tomorrow, just be Catherine. Because sometimes that's all a person needs to be. The morning of my flight came faster than I expected. I woke before sunrise, made myself a cup of coffee, and watched the desert sky change colors through my kitchen window. Scottsdale mornings always calm me. The stillness before the world wakes up reminds me that not everything needs rushing. I had already packed the night before. Just a small carry-on with a few simple outfits, my blue cardigan, my old leather purse, and the same comfortable shoes I wear everywhere. They're nothing fancy, but they've carried me through more years than I care to count. Richard had called the night before, trying one more time to convince me to buy something new for the trip. "Mom, it's just dinner," he said, "but Lori's mom can be a little polished. Maybe we could stop by the mall when you get here." I laughed softly. "Richard, the people who love me won't care what I'm wearing, and the people who do care aren't worth impressing." He sighed, but I could hear the smile in his voice. "You always have an answer." I told him, "That's what happens when you live long enough. You collect a few of them." When I got to the airport, I parked my car in the long-term lot and walked toward the terminal. I'd always flown Southwest. It's simple, reliable, and I like the people who work there. They treat you like a person, not a number. The woman at the check-in counter smiled as she took my ID. "Headed somewhere nice today, ma'am?" "Dallas," I said. "Family visit." "Well, have a lovely time," she said warmly. I thanked her and made my way to the gate. Airports can make people impatient, but I find them interesting. You can see so many lives crossing paths for a few hours, people hugging, crying, running to gates, starting new chapters or ending old ones. When I boarded, I took a window seat near the middle of the plane. A young woman sat beside me, balancing a baby on her lap and a diaper bag that looked ready to burst. She looked tired but kind. "You've got your hands full," I said. She smiled weakly. "Tell me about it." He didn't sleep at all last night. We started chatting. Her name was Amy, and she was flying to see her mother in Oklahoma City. She'd just left her husband after things stopped being safe, as she put it. Her eyes told me everything she didn't say. I listened, holding her baby while she took a few sips of water. The little boy, maybe 6 months old, had big curious eyes. He stared at my necklace, a small silver cross Harold had given me on our 10th anniversary. "You've got a brave mom," I whispered to him. Amy smiled, her eyes welling up. "I just hope I'm doing the right thing." "You are," I told her. "Sometimes doing the right thing just feels hard at first." She nodded, and for the rest of the flight, we talked quietly about ordinary things, coffee, kids, finding peace. When we landed, she hugged me and said, "You remind me of my grandmother." That meant more to me than she knew. At baggage claim, I grabbed my small suitcase. While others wheeled out designer luggage, I carried my scuffed brown bag with its worn handle. It didn't bother me. That bag had been with me to weddings, funerals, vacations, and even the day Harold and I moved into our first home. When I walked outside, the Texas humidity hit me full in the face. The air felt heavier than Arizona's dry heat. I spotted Richard's SUV at the curb. Lori waved me over, her smile bright but tight. "Mom, over here," she called. I climbed into the back seat, careful not to scuff the spotless floor mats. The car smelled like new leather and something floral. Lori turned down the air conditioner and said, "Hope the flight was okay." "It was fine," I said. "Met a young mother on the plane. Reminded me how strong women can be." Lori smiled politely. "That's nice." Richard glanced at me in the mirror. "Ready to see Texas high life, Mom?" I laughed. I'll believe it when I see it. As we drove through Dallas, I watched out the window. The city was big and shiny, full of glass towers and wide highways. Then we turned into Highland Park, where everything looked polished and perfect. The lawns were trimmed like carpets, and the houses were more like estates than homes. When we finally stopped, I saw the Collins house. It was large but quiet, painted white with green shutters, a driveway lined with trimmed hedges. The kind of place that probably hosted fundraisers and garden luncheons. Lori hopped out first. "Mom, let me grab your bag," she said quickly. She looked around, almost like she hoped no one saw her mother-in-law carrying a small worn suitcase. "I've got it, dear," I said, pulling the handle up. She hesitated, then let me. Her eyes flicked toward the front door, and I could sense her nerves tightening. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh flowers. Everything looked perfect. No dust, no clutter, no warmth. The walls were covered with framed family photos, an art that probably cost more than one of my rental homes. Patricia, Lori's mother, came out of the kitchen wearing pearls and a crisp white blouse. "Catherine, how lovely to finally meet you," she said, her voice polite but distant. "Thank you for having me," I replied. Her husband, Gerald, appeared behind her, tall and serious, holding a glass of something amber-colored. "Welcome," he said simply, before turning back toward what looked like an office off the hallway. I could feel the temperature drop, though the air conditioner hummed steadily. Lori fussed, showing me to the guest room like a hostess who didn't want to make a mistake. The room was big, with cream-colored bedding and a view of the garden. "This is perfect," I told her. She smiled faintly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Dinner's tomorrow night. It's a formal place, but don't worry, just be comfortable." I nodded. "Comfortable's all I know, sweetheart." That night, I unpacked my things and sat on the edge of the bed. Through the window, I could see soft lights in the backyard, reflecting off the pool. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel like home. As I lay down to rest, I thought about Amy from the plane. She had left everything she knew because she wanted something better for her child. Maybe we all have our own tests in life, some loud, some quiet. Mine, I suspected, was just beginning. The next evening came faster than I expected. I spent most of the day reading on the back porch, trying to keep my nerves steady. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It felt like a place where people whispered, so they wouldn't disturb the shine on the furniture. By late afternoon, Lori knocked softly on my door. "Mom, dinner's at 7. My parents like to start on time." I smiled. "I'll be ready." I put on my navy skirt, my favorite blue cardigan, and a simple gold necklace Harold had given me on our 40th anniversary. I brushed my hair, applied a touch of powder, and looked at myself in the mirror. The face looking back wasn't perfect, but it was honest. When I came downstairs, the smell of lemon polish mixed with roasted meat. The dining room was something out of a magazine. Long table, candles, silverware laid in perfect rows. I tried to imagine little Caleb running through here and couldn't. Patricia Collins stood near the table arranging flowers. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she turned. "Catherine, you look lovely," she said, smiling in that polite way that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Thank you," I said. "You have a beautiful home." She nodded. "Gerald's proud of it. He designed most of the interior himself. He has an eye for quality." I could see what she meant. Every chair matched. Every curtain hung just so. Nothing out of place. Nothing that felt lived in. Gerald walked in a moment later, scrolling on his phone. He gave me a quick glance, a firm nod, and said, "Good evening." Then he sat down at the head of the table without another word. Richard and Lori followed close behind. I noticed Lori's hands fidgeting with her napkin, her smile too quick, her voice too high. She was nervous, and I could tell she was trying to manage everyone's moods at once. Patricia clapped her hands lightly. Let's start with drinks. Gerald, would you pour the wine? He didn't look up from his phone. Already opened, he said. She sighed through her smile. Of course it is. As we sat, Patricia's gaze fell on my old brown purse resting on the floor beside my chair. Such a cozy little purse, Mrs. Warren, she said. I haven't seen one like that in years. I smiled, unfazed. It's older than my grandson, I said, but it still carries what I need. Lori's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I caught her eyes for a second. She looked both embarrassed and relieved that I wasn't offended. Patricia gave a light laugh. Well, that's wonderful. I suppose it's nice to hold on to simple things. Yes, I said. Simple things are easy to trust. For a second, no one spoke. Then Gerald looked up from his phone, finally engaging. Richard tells me you're retired, he said. I am, I replied. Mostly. I help out at the church food pantry back home. Keeps me busy. Patricia's eyebrows lifted slightly. That's admirable. Our foundation donates to similar causes. She turned to Lori. Darling, we should introduce your mother-in-law to the volunteer committee in Dallas. They have great programs for seniors, budgeting, community meals, that sort of thing. I almost smiled at the word budgeting. I wasn't insulted, just quietly amused. That's very thoughtful. I said, but I think I'll leave those programs for people who really need them. Richard glanced at me with a faint grin, but Lori kicked him under the table, probably afraid I'd said too much. Dinner was served by a young woman named Sandra, who moved so quietly I barely noticed her at first. Patricia thanked her with a smile that didn't look at her. The first course was some kind of chilled soup that tasted faintly of cucumber and salt. Everyone pretended to enjoy it. I thought of how, back home, I'd rather have a warm bowl of chicken noodle and a piece of buttered toast. Gerald asked Richard about work, about the kids, about investments. Every time Richard spoke, Gerald nodded like a man measuring numbers instead of people. At one point, Patricia turned to me. So, Catherine, do you still live in the same little house you raised Richard in? Yes, I said. It's quiet, but it's home. She smiled again, but there was a slight tilt in her tone. I always tell Lori how nice it must be for you to manage on a fixed income. My mother struggled with that after my father passed. I took a sip of water. I do fine, I said simply. Lori shifted in her seat, her face turning a light shade of pink. Patricia pressed on, clearly thinking she was being kind. Well, if you ever need advice, Gerald's firm handles retirement planning. We help families secure what little they have left. Gerald cleared his throat, but didn't correct her. I folded my napkin neatly in my lap. That's generous of you, I said, though I found peace in living within my means. A person's worth isn't measured by their accounts. After all, Gerald gave a short laugh. That's one way to look at it. Yes, I said. It's the way that helps me sleep at night. Lori's fork clinked against her plate. Richard kept his head down. Patricia smiled tightly and turned to ask Lori about the children, clearly eager to change the subject. As the main course came out, some perfectly arranged salmon with asparagus, conversation shifted to travel and country clubs. I mostly listened. Patricia and Gerald spoke about a recent trip to Italy, the kind of places they stayed, the wine they brought back. Have you traveled much, Catherine? Patricia asked. Here and there, I said, mostly to visit family. I've always believed you can see beauty anywhere if you look close enough. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile people give when they don't quite understand. By dessert, Lori looked exhausted from trying to manage the mood. She jumped at every silence, filled every gap with chatter. I felt sorry for her. When the plates were cleared, Patricia thanked me for coming. "We so rarely get to sit down with family these days," she said. "You're welcome here anytime." "Thank you," I said. "You have a lovely home and a gracious table." And I meant it, though maybe not the way she thought I did. As I went upstairs to the guest room later, I paused halfway up the stairs. From the hallway, I could hear Patricia's voice in the dining room, low and clipped. "She's very sweet, dear. Modest. You can tell she's not used to this sort of company." I didn't stay to hear the rest. I'd heard enough. When I reached my room, I closed the door softly and sat on the edge of the bed. I wasn't angry, just sad. Sad that kindness could sound so much like pity when spoken by the wrong person. I thought of what Pastor Ray had said, that people show their hearts over dinner. He was right. They certainly had. The next evening, Patricia decided we'd all go out to dinner. She called it a little get-together, but from the way she described it, I could tell it was no small thing. The restaurant was in downtown Dallas, one of those places that make you hand your keys to a valet before you even open the door. When we pulled up, the entrance glowed with soft golden lights. Men in suits were greeting guests by name, and women walked in wearing dresses that probably cost more than my first car. Lori smoothed her skirt and whispered, "It's one of my parents' favorite places. You'll love it." I smiled. If they serve coffee and good bread, I'll love it just fine. Inside, the hostess led us to a private dining room at the back. A chandelier hung low over the table, and there were more forks beside each plate than I knew what to do with. A waiter poured sparkling water before I could even ask for plain. Gerald took the seat at the head of the table again, like he always belonged there. Patricia sat beside him, posture perfect. Richard sat next to me, and Lori next to her mother. From the way Lori's hand kept twisting the napkin in her lap, I knew she was nervous. As the waiter poured wine, Patricia began her usual stories about their recent trip to France, how they stayed at a vineyard in Provence, and were personally invited to a private wine tasting. Gerald added, "It's a shame Americans don't understand what real food tastes like. Everything here is overseasoned." I nodded politely. Well, I still like a good meatloaf and mashed potatoes. That earned a polite chuckle from Patricia, though I caught the way she glanced at Lori. I wasn't embarrassed. I knew who I was. The appetizers arrived, tiny plates with even tinier portions. The food was lovely, but I couldn't help thinking it wouldn't fill a teenager. While we ate, Patricia continued talking about their upcoming charity gala. "We're auctioning off vacation homes again this year," she said, smiling at me. "Gerald's golf club in Pebble Beach brings in a wonderful crowd. It's good exposure for the foundation." I listened quietly, nodding when she paused, but I could feel Richard's unease beside me. He knew how different our worlds were, and he didn't know how to bridge them. Patricia turned toward me. "Catherine, what about you, dear? How do you spend your days?" "I volunteer at the church food pantry." I said, simply, "We hand out groceries to families who need a little help. Keeps me busy and reminds me how lucky I am." Patricia tilted her head. "Oh, that's lovely," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We actually have a foundation for families like that. You could apply for assistance if things ever get tight." Richard's fork froze midair. He stared at his mother-in-law, then at me, completely speechless. Lori's face drained of color. She looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I kept my smile steady. "That's very kind of you, Patricia," I said, "but I think the pantry helps folks who have a harder time than I do." Patricia's expression softened, as if she'd just confirmed what she'd assumed. "Still," she said sweetly, "it's good to have options. Retirement can be unpredictable." Gerald cleared his throat, picking up where she left off. "The markets haven't been friendly to fixed incomes lately. My firm sees it all the time. You should really look into our investment seminars. We help seniors make the most of what little they have. He said it with the tone of a man giving advice, not realizing how it sounded. Lori shifted in her seat, murmuring, "Dad," but he didn't hear her, or maybe he didn't want to. I took a slow sip of water. "Thank you, Gerald. I'll think about it." Inside, I felt something turn, a quiet click like a door closing. But I didn't let it show. I wanted to see how far this would go. As the waiter cleared our plates and brought out the main course, some kind of steak with a fancy French name, Patricia leaned closer to me. "You know, Catherine," she said softly, "you remind me of my mother. She was a gentle soul, lived on almost nothing after my father passed, but she never complained." I nodded. "That's admirable." "She used to make her own clothes," Patricia continued, her voice lowering like she was sharing something private. "It was sweet, really. You have that same simple spirit." Lori dropped her napkin and bent to pick it up, probably just to hide her face. Richard rubbed the back of his neck. "Simple can be peaceful," I said calmly. "It keeps the heart from getting noisy." Gerald gave a polite laugh. "That's one way to put it." Patricia smiled at him. "Oh, I didn't mean anything unkind," she said quickly. "I just love meeting people who live differently. It's refreshing." I thought about the word differently. I suppose she meant beneath them, but she didn't realize that. Or maybe she did. When dessert came, Lori barely touched hers. She looked tense, like she was holding her breath. Richard tried to start a new topic, talking about the kids, but Patricia soon circled back. "So, Catherine," she said, "if you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help. A few hundred here or there can make a difference, especially on a fixed budget." That time, even Gerald looked at her. "Patricia," but she waved him off, smiling kindly. "It's just the truth, dear. We're family now." I folded my napkin neatly and placed it on the table. "That's very generous of you," I said, "but I manage fine." Inside, I felt an odd calm settle over me. I'd spent my life learning when to speak, and when silence says more. That night, silence said everything. Patricia took another sip of wine and turned the conversation back to their upcoming charity event. I let her talk. Every word told me something new about who she was. She wasn't cruel, just sheltered, unaware of the way her kindness could cut like glass. When the bill came, Gerald handed over a sleek black credit card without looking at it. I wondered if he'd ever had to check a total in his life. Lori insisted we skip dessert drinks, saying it was late. On the ride home, the car was quiet except for the hum of the highway. Richard finally broke the silence. "Mom, I'm sorry. They didn't mean it that way." "I know," I said gently. "Sometimes people mean well and still make fools of themselves." Lori turned in her seat, her voice small. I didn't think she'd say those things. "It's all right," I told her. It just reminded me how people show their hearts when they think someone has nothing to offer. Neither of them spoke after that. When we got back to the house, I thanked them for dinner and went straight to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, unpinned my hair, and looked out the window. The pool lights shimmered across the water, perfect and still. I thought about what Pastor Ray had said before I left Arizona. Sometimes the Lord lets people show you who they are so you can stop pretending to be blind. He was right. That night, I saw everything clearly, and I knew I wouldn't be staying in Dallas for long. The next morning, the house was quiet when I came downstairs. I could smell fresh coffee and bacon, but the air felt heavy, like everyone was pretending the night before hadn't happened. Patricia was already at the kitchen island, dressed as if she had a meeting to attend, pearls again, neat hair, tablet open beside her plate. Gerald sat at the end of the counter, scrolling through market updates on his phone. He looked up briefly and said, "Morning," before going right back to whatever article he was reading. I smiled. "Good morning." Patricia poured me a cup of coffee before I asked. I wasn't sure how you take it. She said. Black's fine, I said, taking a seat. Smells good in here. Yes, she replied. Our housekeeper preps everything before she leaves. It saves time. I nodded. Convenient. Lori walked in next, still looking a little tired. She greeted everyone softly, then started pouring cereal for the kids, who were coming down the hall laughing. Their little voices filled the room, and for the first time since I'd arrived, the house felt alive. I chatted with Caleb and Lydia about their school projects, while Lori tried to keep things moving. Patricia smiled occasionally, but I could tell she wasn't used to noise at the breakfast table. After the kids finished eating and went out to play in the yard, Gerald finally spoke. Richard tells me you used to help run your husband's plumbing business. That's right, I said. I handled the paperwork and customers. He took care of the pipes. Gerald nodded, still half looking at his phone. Good experience, I suppose. Though I imagine it's difficult making that shift from work to retirement without a proper portfolio. I stirred my coffee. I planned ahead. I said, it's simpler than most people think if you live within your means. He looked up this time. I don't doubt that, he said, but most seniors underestimate how quickly expenses add up. Patricia and I actually fund several programs for retirees who, well, didn't have the same foresight. Patricia reached over to the counter and pulled out a thin brochure. I meant to give you this last night, she said cheerfully. It's for a senior budgeting workshop. They teach little tips, couponing, stretching fixed incomes, that sort of thing. You might find it useful. I took the brochure with a small smile. Thank you, I said, folding it neatly. Inside, I could feel something twist, but I kept my face calm. I'd learned long ago that you don't need to raise your voice to make your point. Lori caught my eye across the table. Her expression said everything she couldn't say aloud. Embarrassment, guilt, maybe even shame. She looked down quickly, pretending to wipe a spot off the counter. Patricia, unaware, kept talking. It's really wonderful what they do for people. You'd be surprised how many older women end up struggling after their husbands pass. It's heartbreaking. Yes, I said quietly. It is. Richard walked in midway through that sentence, sensing the tension instantly. Morning, he said briskly. Coffee, Mom? I already have some, thank you. He sat next to me, giving me that look grown sons give when they don't know how to fix something but wish they could. I gave him a small, reassuring nod. Patricia smiled, seemingly pleased with how smoothly breakfast was going in her eyes. I was thinking, she continued, you should come with us to our country club tonight. They're hosting a small charity mixer. You could meet some of the local members. That's very kind, I said, but I'm heading home this afternoon. The room went quiet. Lori looked up sharply. This afternoon? I thought you were staying until Sunday. I changed my mind. I said calmly, I'd like to get back before the weekend rush. Oh, Patricia said, blinking. Already? But we were planning dinner. You've been lovely hosts, I said, standing to refill my coffee. But I think it's best I get back home. I have some church business to handle. Lori bit her lip, her voice soft. Are you sure, Mom? I'm sure, I said gently. Sometimes home just calls you sooner. I excused myself to pack my bag. Upstairs, I folded my things carefully, slid the brochure Patricia had given me into the side pocket of my purse, and zipped up my suitcase. As I looked around the guest room one last time, I realized it was beautiful but empty. Not a single family photo, not even a book on the nightstand. Everything looked perfect, but cold, just like dinner the night before. When I came downstairs, Richard offered to drive me to the airport. I told him that wouldn't be necessary. I'd already booked a ride. I wish you'd stay, he said quietly near the door. I know, I said, touching his hand, but it's time I head home. Don't worry about me, son. Lori hugged me tightly, her voice low. I'm sorry about last night, she whispered. I smiled. You didn't do anything wrong. People just show themselves sometimes. That's all. On the drive to the airport, the silence felt comforting for once. The driver chatted about traffic, and I nodded, half listening. When we reached the terminal, I thanked him, grabbed my little suitcase, and walked inside. I had a couple of hours before my flight, so I found a quiet table at a cafe near my gate. I ordered a black coffee and a small pastry. Pulling out my old notebook, I flipped to an empty page. The same notebook I'd used for years, lists, bills, prayers, and the occasional thought I didn't want to say out loud. I wrote, "Sometimes silence says more than pride." Then underneath it, I added, "And sometimes kindness needs no words at all." I sat there, sipping my coffee, watching travelers rush past, families hugging, business folks typing, young people glued to their phones. Everyone going somewhere, trying to be someone. For the first time since arriving in Dallas, I felt like myself again. When they called for boarding, I closed the notebook, tucked it back in my purse, and smiled. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I just knew that next time we all sat down at a table, the story would be very different. Because now I had seen their hearts clearly, and they hadn't seen mine yet. 2 weeks after I came back home to Arizona, I finally felt like the dust had settled. The desert air felt good again. The familiar quiet of my small house wrapped around me like an old friend. I tended my succulents, took Daisy for her walks, and went back to my routine at the church pantry. Life has a way of reminding you what really matters once you get back to the simple things. Then one evening, Richard called. "Mom, Caleb's birthday is coming up," he said. "Lori thought maybe we could do something small in Dallas this year. The kids want you there." I smiled. "That's sweet, but why don't you all come here instead? Let me host for a change." He hesitated. "Here? You sure?" "Positive," I said. "You can stay with me, and we'll have the party at that park near my place, the one with the big playground. It's perfect for kids." He agreed, though I could tell he was surprised. Maybe he thought I'd be too tired to plan anything. What he didn't know was that I'd already been thinking about this for days. I wanted a simple celebration that would let everyone relax, but also one that might quietly show them who I really was. Not out of pride, but to clear the air that had hung between us since that dinner in Dallas. Over the next week, I made arrangements. The local park I mentioned wasn't just any park. It was part of the small development project I'd invested in years ago. It sat on the edge of one of my rental communities, surrounded by clean, family-friendly homes I'd helped build after the last housing slump. I called a catering company I knew through the church, ordered a big white tent for shade, and arranged tables and chairs. It wasn't flashy, but it was well done. I wanted the day to feel warm and welcoming, not like a show. When the morning of the party came, the Arizona sun was bright but forgiving. The grass sparkled from the early sprinkler mist, and a soft breeze carried the smell of barbecue and cupcakes. I wore a light linen dress and my blue cardigan, always my favorite, and tied my hair back. By 10 o'clock, Richard's car pulled up, followed by another one right behind it. When I saw who stepped out, I smiled. It was Gerald and Patricia Collins. Lori must have invited them, probably thinking it was the polite thing to do. I didn't mind. In fact, I was glad. Some lessons life delivers better in person. Patricia wore a sun hat and large sunglasses, and Gerald looked slightly out of place without his usual blazer. Lori waved nervously as they approached. "Mom," she said, "I hope you don't mind. My parents decided to surprise Caleb." "Of course not," I said warmly. "The more the merrier." I guided them toward the tent. Children were already running around with balloons, and the smell of grilled chicken filled the air. Music played softly in the background, and the caterers handed out lemonade. Patricia looked around, impressed but trying not to show it. "Well, this is lovely," she said. "You really went all out." "Oh, I just wanted Caleb to have a nice day," I replied. "The park has been good to me." She glanced toward the edge of the field, where construction equipment stood beyond a chain-link fence. "Looks like there's a new project going up nearby," she said. "Yes," I said. "They're finishing the last few homes this month." As we stood talking, a man in a hard hat and work boots came walking across the grass. He waved as soon as he saw me. "Morning, Mrs. Warren," he called cheerfully. "We finished installing the solar panels on the east units yesterday. The tenants love them. Makes a big difference in their electric bills." Patricia's head turned sharply. "Mrs. Warren?" I smiled. "Morning, Dave. I appreciate you getting it done before the heat wave." "No problem," he said. "We'll send the invoice next week. Have a great event." When he walked off, Patricia blinked twice, as if she wasn't sure she'd heard right. "Wait," she said slowly. "You mean you're the owner?" I nodded. "Yes, I am. I've owned this development for about 12 years now." Gerald looked like he was trying to process it. "This is your property?" "Every house, except for the ones the church helped with." I said, "We built these for families who needed affordable rentals. It's been a good project." Patricia's mouth opened slightly, then closed. For once, she didn't have anything to say. Lori stood frozen beside her, eyes wide. Richard stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Mom," he said quietly, "why didn't you ever tell us?" I smiled, because I didn't want my family or anyone to look at me differently. I wanted to see how people treat others before they know what's in their bank account. Gerald cleared his throat. "That's impressive," he said, still struggling to find his words. Patricia's face softened, though she looked uncomfortable. "I had no idea," she said. "I know," I replied kindly. "But that's the thing about life. You never really know someone until you take the time to listen." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I just let the truth hang there, plain and gentle. Lori finally spoke. "Mom, I didn't mean to make you feel small in Dallas. I just wanted everyone to get along." "I know, dear," I said. "You don't need to explain. Sometimes we all let other people's opinions steer us." The kids ran by laughing, chasing balloons, their joy breaking the tension. I turned to Patricia. "Would you like to meet some of the families who live here? They're wonderful people. Most of them work 2 jobs to keep their kids in school. That's why I wanted this place built, to give them a safe home to come back to." Patricia nodded slowly. "Yes, I'd like that." We walked a few steps closer to the fence, where a few tenants were waving and smiling. Patricia waved back, awkward at first, then genuinely. Gerald followed, quiet but thoughtful. Later, as everyone gathered under the tent to sing "Happy Birthday," I caught Patricia watching me again. This time her expression wasn't judgmental. It was curious, maybe even respectful. When the candles were blown out and cake slices passed around, she came up to me. "Catherine," she said softly, "I owe you an apology. I spoke out of ignorance at that dinner. I hope you can forgive me." "Of course," I said. "We all learn at our own pace." She nodded, eyes glistening just a little. "You're a remarkable woman." "I'm just a grandmother," I said with a smile. "One who happens to love her family and her community." As the sun began to set, I looked around at the laughter, the food, the families, and the bright faces of my grandkids. For once, there was no tension, just gratitude. In that moment, I realized I hadn't needed to teach anyone a lesson. The truth had done it for me. And the best part, I never had to raise my voice to be heard. After the party wound down, most of the guests had left, and the sun dipped low behind the desert hills. The air had cooled, and golden light spread across the park. Caleb and Lydia were chasing the last few balloons that hadn't popped yet, and the sound of their laughter softened the quiet that followed the day's surprises. Gerald and Patricia were still sitting under the tent, holding plastic cups of lemonade. From the look on Gerald's face, I could tell he was trying to process everything. Patricia looked lost in thought, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Finally, Gerald stood, straightened his shirt, and cleared his throat. "Well," he said with an awkward smile, "I have to say, Catherine, you had us all fooled." I tilted my head slightly. I didn't set out to fool anyone. Gerald, he gave a half laugh, still uncomfortable. "I mean, you played the part well. The modest purse, the cardigan, very convincing." I smiled faintly. "That wasn't a part. That's just me." Patricia placed a hand on his arm. "Gerald," she whispered, "don't." He sighed and nodded, finally quiet. Patricia turned to me, her voice soft. "You must think terribly of us." I looked at her kindly. "I don't think terribly of anyone, but I did see things clearly." She met my eyes for the first time without a polite mask. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I truly am. I judged you. I thought I was being gracious, but I wasn't. I was being proud." I nodded. "We all stumble that way sometimes. You don't owe me anything but honesty, Patricia. That's worth more than any apology." Her eyes watered a little, and she turned away, pretending to fix her hat. I didn't push her. People need space to find their humility. A few minutes later, Lori walked over. She'd been helping the caterers clean up, but I could tell from her face she'd been waiting for the right moment. She touched my arm gently. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course," I said, stepping away from the tent with her. We walked toward the fence line, where the kids' laughter echoed faintly. She hesitated before speaking. "I owe you the biggest apology of all." "You don't owe me anything, Lori." "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "I wanted them to like you so much. I thought if I made you seem smaller, they'd accept me more easily. I didn't think they'd judge you that fast, or so harshly. I thought I was protecting everyone, but really, I was protecting my pride." I let her words sit for a moment. Then I said softly, "The way people treat those they think have less, that's who they really are. And sometimes the way we allow it says who we are too." Her shoulders dropped, and she looked at the ground. "I know. I see that now. I'm ashamed of how I let it happen." I reached over and took her hand. "Don't stay ashamed, Lori. Just be different next time. You're a good woman, but you let fear guide you. Don't do that again." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I promise I won't." We stood there quietly for a while, watching Caleb and Lydia run in the distance. The sky turned pink, and the air smelled faintly of barbecue and birthday cake. Richard walked up behind us. "You two okay?" he asked gently. Lori gave him a small smile and stepped back toward the tent to help with the last few plates. That left Richard and me standing there, facing the field. He took a deep breath. "Mom, I need to say something too." I turned to him, waiting. "I should have said something at that dinner," he said. "When they treated you like that, I should have spoken up. I just sat there, embarrassed and quiet. I'm sorry." I touched his arm. "You don't have to fight every battle, Richard. Sometimes truth fights for itself." He looked down, shaking his head. "You always make things sound so simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy," I said. "It just means clear." He smiled slightly. "You really showed them today." "I didn't show them anything," I said. "They showed themselves. I just let the moment breathe long enough for everyone to see it." He looked out over the field again, his voice softer. "Dad would have been proud of you." That caught me off guard for a second. He always said kindness was stronger than pride. I replied, maybe he was right. He usually was, Richard said, smiling. We walked back toward the tent, where Patricia was helping Lori pack leftover cupcakes into small boxes. Gerald was loading chairs into the back of his SUV. It was strange to see him do something himself, but I appreciated the gesture. As they finished, Patricia came over again. Catherine, I wanted to thank you for today, she said. I didn't know what to expect when Lori invited us, but I'm glad we came. You've given me a lot to think about. I smiled. Life's funny that way. Sometimes it teaches us lessons in places we never planned to learn them. She nodded. If you ever come to Dallas again, I'd like to make it right. No fancy restaurants this time, just dinner at our home. Something honest. I'd like that, I said. When they left, I watched their car drive down the road, dust rising behind it. The sky had turned a deep orange, and the air was still. Richard and Lori were gathering the last of the decorations. Caleb ran up, holding a half-deflated balloon. Grandma, this was the best birthday ever, he said. I knelt down and kissed the top of his head. I'm glad, sweetheart. You deserve it. Lydia tugged on my sleeve. Grandma, did you build all those houses? I smiled. I helped make sure families could live in them. That's close enough. Then you're like a builder, she said proudly. Maybe I am, I said, laughing softly. Just a different kind. As we finished packing up, I looked back one last time at the park, the homes, and the people who had gathered there. So many stories living side by side. Some humble, some proud, all human. Driving home later, the road quiet and open, I thought about how life has a way of circling back. You can stay silent for years, and then one day, without even trying, truth walks right into the room and introduces itself. That evening, when I sat on my porch with Daisy curled at my feet, I felt peaceful, not because I'd been proven right, but because kindness had won without needing to raise its voice. And that, to me, was worth more than all the wealth in the world. A few weeks after Caleb's birthday, life settled back into its quiet rhythm. The air in Scottsdale was warm and dry, and the desert flowers were just starting to bloom again. I went back to my mornings at the church pantry, helping bag groceries and chatting with the volunteers. It felt good to return to something simple, something that reminded me that real wealth has nothing to do with numbers. One morning, as I was sorting canned vegetables, Pastor Ray walked in with a big grin. Catherine, I saw you in the news, he said, waving a folded newspaper. I blinked. The news? What on earth for? He handed it to me, pointing to the front page of the local section. There was a small photo of the new senior housing units we'd finished near the park, the same development that sat behind Caleb's birthday tent. The headline read, Local woman quietly funds affordable homes for Scottsdale seniors. I laughed softly. They must have run out of stories this week. He chuckled. You're modest as ever, but you should know it's inspired a few others in town to donate land for the next project. That made me smile. I didn't need my name in lights. I just wanted to see people have a safe place to live. My husband used to say, you can't take the houses with you, but you can leave the doors open for someone else. That afternoon, I went home and wrote another check, this time to expand the pantry's outreach to seniors who couldn't drive anymore. We started a small delivery team, and I helped coordinate it with 2 volunteers from church. It felt right to use what I had for something that would outlast me. A week later, I received a small envelope in the mail. The handwriting on the front was neat and careful. I didn't recognize it until I turned it over and saw Patricia Collins written in the corner. I opened it and found a short note on ivory stationery. Dear Catherine, I've thought a lot about the day of Caleb's birthday and about my behavior before that. I realize now that kindness means nothing if it only shows up for people who look like us. I'm deeply sorry for the way I spoke to you. I hope someday you'll allow me to make it right. With sincerity, Patricia. There was a second note tucked inside, this one shorter. I've started volunteering at a food pantry near our home in Dallas. It's not much, but it's a start. I sat at my kitchen table and smiled. I didn't need more than that. Change doesn't happen all at once. It starts with one humble step. Not long after that, Lori called. Mom, we've been thinking of bringing the kids out for a week this summer, she said. Would that be okay? Of course, I said. The guest room's always ready. When they arrived, it wasn't with the polished nervousness I'd seen before. Lori came through the door carrying flowers from her yard. Richard brought groceries. The kids ran straight to the backyard to feed Daisy treats. At dinner that night, Lori looked around my small but cozy dining room. I get it now, she said quietly. Why you stayed in this house all these years. It feels like peace. I nodded. Peace costs less than people think, but you have to want it. She smiled, a little sad but grateful. I used to chase comfort, but I see now that peace and comfort aren't the same thing. You're learning, I said. That's what matters. Over the next few days, we spent time doing ordinary things. Pancakes in the morning, puzzles with the kids, a walk through the park. It felt like old times, except lighter, easier. Nobody was trying to prove anything. One afternoon, I took Lori to the church pantry. I wanted her to see where my time went. She met the volunteers, helped pack food boxes, and watched as people came and went with smiles and quiet thanks. On the way home, she said softly, I thought giving was supposed to feel like sacrifice, but it doesn't. It feels full. I smiled. That's because you're giving the right way, the kind that feeds both sides. Later that summer, Patricia surprised me again. She came to Arizona with Gerald for a business conference and asked if she could stop by the pantry to help for a few hours. I said yes, of course. She showed up in jeans and sneakers, her hair pulled back, and she worked like she meant it, stacking boxes, chatting with the other volunteers, listening more than she talked. At the end of the day, she walked over to me and said quietly, You were right, Catherine. I thought I was generous before, but I was just comfortable. This feels different. It is different, I said. Real generosity never leaves you proud. It leaves you grateful. When she left, she hugged me, an honest, unguarded hug. It was the first time we'd ever embraced. As time went on, things between our families changed. Gerald sent a donation to the housing fund, and Patricia kept volunteering when she came to visit. Lori called me more often, not out of duty, but out of love. And Richard, well, he finally stopped worrying about keeping everyone happy. He just let us all be. Sometimes when I sat on my porch in the evenings, I'd think about how far we'd come from that dinner table in Dallas. Back then, I'd felt small in their eyes. Now, no one felt small anymore. Peace had settled where pride once lived. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, I whispered to myself, this is what money can't buy. Because no amount of wealth can buy self-respect, forgiveness, or the quiet joy of knowing you've made life a little easier for someone else. And as I watched the light fade over the desert, I realized something else. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving what you have. It's living in a way that shows you never needed to prove anything at all. It's funny how life can change without warning. One day, you're sitting quietly at a dinner table being politely pitted, and a few months later, the same people are sending you handwritten letters and volunteering beside you. Time has a way of humbling us all. These days, my life looks almost exactly the same as it did before all that happened. I still live in my small house in Scottsdale, still walk Daisy every morning, and still help at the church pantry twice a week. The only real difference is the peace I feel now. It's fuller, calmer, It's not the kind of peace that comes from wealth or comfort, but from understanding what truly matters. I often sit out on my porch in the late afternoon. That's my favorite time of day. The air cools, the sky turns soft pink, and the birds gather by the feeder that Caleb helped me hang. Sometimes he sits beside me, tossing crumbs to the little sparrows that come hopping across the railing. "Grandma," he said one day, "Mom said you own a bunch of houses. Does that mean you're rich?" I smiled at him. "Depends on what kind of rich you mean, sweetheart. I have enough money to help people, and enough love to make life sweet. That's all the rich I need." He nodded slowly, trying to understand. "So, being rich doesn't mean you have a big house." "No," I said, "it means you have a big heart." He grinned, satisfied with that answer, and went back to feeding the birds. When he ran back inside to help Lori bake cookies, I sat quietly for a while, watching the desert light fade. I thought about everything that had happened since that dinner in Dallas. The discomfort, the silence, the quiet reveal, and how differently everyone behaved once the truth came out. The older I get, the more I realize that money can't hide a person's true nature. You can dress pride in fancy clothes, but it still shows. And kindness, it shines no matter how plain the wrapping. That night in Dallas, I acted like a poor and naive grandmother because I wanted to see what kind of people I was breaking bread with. I didn't do it to play a trick. I did it because I've lived long enough to know that some folks only see value when there's a dollar sign attached to it. But the truth is, real worth doesn't sit in a bank account. It lives in how we treat one another. Patricia and Gerald learned that lesson too, though not the easy way. To their credit, they didn't just say sorry. They changed. That's what I respect. Because saying sorry is easy, but showing it takes time, effort, and humility. Lori changed too. She's softer now, less concerned about what people think, more grateful for what she has. She visits more often, calls just to talk, and even helps organize pantry events when she's in town. I think she's finally learned that pride builds walls while gratitude opens doors. As for me, I've learned something too. I learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than words, that you don't need to prove yourself to anyone who only values what they can see. I learned that grace has power, not the loud, showy kind, but the quiet, steady kind that stands firm without bitterness. You can't buy good manners and you can't fake compassion. The world might try to convince you that appearances matter more than actions, but those of us who've lived long enough, we know better. We've seen what lasts and what fades. As I sit here now, watching the sun dip below the mountains, I can't help but wonder, how many times have people looked past someone who had more goodness in their heart than in their wallet? How many have been judged before being understood? Sometimes I wish I could tell every young person this. Never measure someone by their car, their house, or their clothes. Those things can disappear in a moment. But a kind soul, that's something no one can take away. That's why I forgive Patricia and Gerald, because in their own way, they helped me see that my choice to live quietly wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror. It reflected who they were and reminded me who I was. Would I do it again? Maybe, but not to test anyone this time, just to remind myself that grace always wins. When Caleb came back outside with a plate of cookies, he handed me one and said, "Grandma, I think you're the nicest person I know." I smiled and said, "Well, I've had a lot of practice." He laughed and leaned against me, warm and happy. In that small moment, I realized something else. Being underestimated is never a loss. It's just another chance to surprise people with who you really are. And maybe that's the greatest gift life gives us, to show others that strength doesn't need to shout, and that real wealth can look a lot like simplicity. Before I close this chapter of my story, I want to ask you, yes, you listening right now, something to think about. Have you ever been treated differently because someone thought you had less? Did you forgive them when they came back? Think about that for a moment. because the answer says more about your heart than your circumstances ever will. If my story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own journey or someone you know, then I'd love to hear about it. Share your thoughts below, tell me your story, or just let me know what lesson life has taught you about kindness and pride. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling stories that remind us all what truly matters: love, dignity, and the quiet strength that never goes out of style. Lastly, don't forget to download this wonderful book called Coming Back to Myself: 60 Liberating Truths to Find Yourself Again. It's a powerful guide for that very journey. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Now, if you like this story, go ahead and click on the next video appearing on your screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revolt like you've never seen before on her Kindle Stories. Remember, you are worthy of respect, and it's never too late to set boundaries. Be humble enough to listen, strong enough to forgive, and wise enough to know what money can't buy.